So that will be an opportunity just to mark this occasion.
Magic, I think we don't have the sound.
Apparently, there was a problem with the sound. Is that correct?
Yeah, we don't have any,
okay.
any soundtrack.
But don't worry. We will. I think you got the essence of our message, and we can fix it for the final, for the closing remarks. So we will try to make it to project it once again. But again, as I said, I think the key message has passed through. So without further delay, I would like. I've got a great. Pleasure now to, before we go to the first session, we'll have actually today 2 sessions, the first one a bit longer and then the following one. But before this, it's my great pleasure to welcome and give the floor to our keynote speaker, Ms. Ana Carla Pereira, cabinet expert on employment and social affairs for Commissioner Nicolas Schmit in charge of jobs and social rights. So very welcome to you, Ms. Pereira. I know that you will have certainly some insights to share with us regarding the pension adequacy report from this year, but I do also hope that you will share with us also some further insights about how the European Commission actually, what's your appetite, initiatives and plans as well to implement the principle 15 of the European Pillar of Social Rights on old age income pensions and old age income. Therefore, again, thank you for taking your time to be with us, and the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Masej, and good afternoon to everyone who's listening to us. I see some dear and well-known faces, so I feel I'm among friends, at least those that I see on screen. And I would like certainly to congratulate the Age Platform for organizing this week, which brings more visibility to the issues that many of us are working on, sometimes in a more silent manner. So this type of activities allows us certainly to bring the discussion to a more public sphere. Masej, you asked me to discuss about the findings of the Pension Adequacy Report and a little bit of a broader context. I see that Kees Dekkers, who has been the chair of the working group dealing with preparing the pension report, is there. So I think if I will be very succinct on the first part, on the key findings, he will be there to certainly to go much further if need so, and maybe use my time to share a bit of some ideas of how we see pensions in the broader picture, if you allow me. Of course, but before doing that, of course, I really want to congratulate Kees and all those who worked on this report, which is a 3rd edition of the Pensions Adequacy Report. And I think it's now safe to say this is a tradition that we will continue. And I think this is an important message to start with, is that monitoring the pensions adequacy is no longer just a a punctual exercise is something we want to do on a constant basis, so that we are able to have an over-encompassing picture of what is happening on pensions in Europe. And this obviously allows to complement the picture that has been developed over time through the aging report and the sustainability of the system. So from a Commission point of view, having these two exercises coming together in the same, more or less in the same tempo, is very important to have a comprehensive picture of what is going on. And with that it means that there will be a fourth edition, hopefully, in a couple of years. Now, I think one important feature of the recent study is obviously in the context that we are in, or the context in which we have been living in the last years. I think obviously the pandemic affected us all, some more than others, and certainly more the vulnerable groups than others. And the effects on the pension system are not completely known yet. What does this mean for the pension system? So this is something that we will need to study in the years to come. But I think it's fair to say that the pensions have worked as a stabilizer of income through the pandemic, and have continued to exercise the social protection function through the pandemic. And this just also is a proof that robust pension systems are important, not only in let's say normal times, but also in times of crisis. And this is something that we always need to remember. Now, from all the findings of the report, I think I would like to identify three, or highlight three. There's much more, but I think there are three that allow me to elaborate a little bit further. The first is, of course, that the pension, the adequacy of pensions, of course, has an impact on old age poverty, and that we see that old age poverty is not necessarily decreasing. I mean, these are all obviously always concepts that we need to be able to explain vis-a-vis other groups of the population. But what we see is that income poverty at old age is not improving. On the contrary, there is a concern there. The second aspect is, of course, that income support by itself and pensions by itself will not be the panacea to old age poverty. I mean, it is a fundamental contribution, but alone it will not do the job. And so it is important to place pension policies in a wider context of other policies that, of course, affect old age, but start their work in previous stages of a person's life. And we need to look at pensions in conjunction with policies, for example, related to healthcare, access to long-term care, access to affordable housing, so that we do have a comprehensive picture of the living standard of elderly people. And of course, and we all know this, but I think it's never too much to repeat. The state of our pensions is very much a reflection and a mirror of what happens in previous years in a person's life, what happens in the labor markets. And obviously some of the gaps in terms of protection of pensions are just the accumulation of gaps that happen over the working life. And if we look particularly at the situation of women, we see that the gender pension gap has slightly decreased in the last year. So if we compare the most recent edition of the Pension Adequacy Report to the previous one, we see that there is an improvement, but it's still, the gap is still incredibly big. And of course, this will only, in many ways, will only be closed once we also address the gaps in the labor market, because this is a compound effect of lower female participation in the labor market, lower wages, and also a predominance of part-time work, so less hours that lead to contributions in the pension system. So obviously, all the actions, all the policies that allow us to increase participation in the labor market, increase wages during the working life, and in many ways also cater for the career breaks that people might have during their work life, will certainly have a bearing in the pension adequacy later on. So when we take this into account, obviously, we also need to think, okay, this is about the design of the system and the way we collectively define the social contract between different generations. So there are things that we are very well studied, and we are now well informed of certain policies that can take place. But one novelty of this pension adequacy report that I want to bring here also is the fact that all this might still not be enough to consider the sustainability of the systems and the adequacy of pensions. And this report actually tries to shed some light on the sources of financing of the pension systems, and what might this mean in the future if let's say the labor share of income decreases as it or continues to decrease, as we have been seeing over the last years. And so is there a need for alternative sources of financing to the system? And I think the report just started to open that debate. It is a very complicated subject, but I think, and there are no immediate answers to the question, but the fact that the report starts to address the problem is in itself a very important step forward in our discussions. Now, as I said, of course, pensions is not to be seen in isolation to other policies, and I would like just here to refer to a couple of initiatives that the Commission has undertaken or will present in the coming months that do have a strict relationship with pension policies, and more broadly affect the levels of or the standards of living of elderly people. And of course, I need to start by referring to the directive on adequate minimum wages that the Commission has presented. This directive is aimed at improving the minimum wages across member states. And the reason why I bring this to the conversation on pensions is related to my previous comment, saying that, well, wages have an impact on how much people will contribute, and then how much people will have in their pensions later on. So having decent wages is a key element for adequacy of pensions, and having adequate minimum wages is a way of supporting those at the lower end of the income distribution, and allowing them to also build better conditions for an adequate pension in the future. The second initiative I want to refer to is one that will come next year, and it is a recommendation on minimum income that the Commission will present the second half of next year. And we all know that minimum income in old age means minimum pensions. So it is clear that when we will look at minimum income, we will have to have a look at what does it mean for the pension and those that receive a pension. So we cannot completely disentangle the two conversations, even if obviously minimum income in its pure construct is related to people that are not yet receiving a pension, but that's purely a terminology separation in a way. The third initiative I wanted to refer to is a European care strategy that the Commission will present next year, which will address the adequacy, affordability of care in Europe, and also looking at working conditions in the sector. And we will give particular attention to issues around long-term care policies, and as part of that strategy, we will present also a Council recommendation on long-term care policies. And obviously, having adequate and affordable long-term care support is essential to ensure complementarity to the income support that pensions bring, obviously, but also in a way ensure that what you get out of your pension is adequate, because if families have to have very high expenses with long-term care that are purely covered by pensions, for example, then of course what is left for the person to eat from or to live. So there is an intrinsic link between the affordability of long-term care systems and or services and pension adequacy. And the last point I wanted to refer, and then I'll stop here if you agree, is the fact that the Commission launched a reflection group on the future of the welfare state. I see that Joseph Pacolet is on the line and is actually a member of that group. The group is chaired by Mrs. Anna Diamantopoulou, a former Commissioner for Employment, and the group is mandated to really look at the future of social protection and the welfare and discuss avenues to make it resilient and fit for the challenges of the future, namely, obviously, the demographic challenge that I think is probably the most known to all of us, but also the challenges related to the evolutions in the labor market, the fact that we have many more new forms of work, and this has a bearing on social contributions, on the fact that we have a green transition that we are all supposed to embrace, but that does bear some risk for some groups in terms of energy poverty, in terms of access to essential services, and therefore, what does it mean to have a fit or an adequate social protection in the future in that context? The group, the high-level group on the future of social protection, is expected to come with a report at the end of next year, 2022. And we hope that this report will allow us to feed some reflections also at political level in council, in the parliament, and of course with civil society and other stakeholders. So I think there is a lot of material coming up that will certainly allow us to continue this discussion, which is a very important one. So thank you so much for listening and for the opportunity of being with you today. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for this very comprehensive presentation. So yes, indeed, there is an appetite on your side in the European Commission. We can see this with all those different initiatives that you have mentioned. I think that also listening to you, how seriously you take, for example, this challenge of the persisting gender pension gap, which is indeed triggered by different inequalities in the labor market. This is something which is really a part of our core business, as I can put it like this, as age. Over the years, we've been insisting so much on this, so we are very reassured that the Commission will continue, of course, on this. The European, of course, I will not go back to everything what you said, but certainly also we are looking into what the Commission will propose for the European care strategy. As you said, this is part also of a debate about adequacy of pensions, old age income. We know long-term care is very work intensive, is very costly. So indeed, by approaching the question of accessibility, affordability of long-term care, actually de facto we have an impact, as you said, on what's left in our pockets. So we are very happy that this work on the European care strategy will also take a broader approach and to also touch on the aspect of adequacy in old age income. I don't know, Ms. Pereira, whether you would be ready to take maybe one or two, if there are any burning questions, something that our participants would like to ask. Is it something that you would accept, or you have to quit us right now immediately, or would you, if there are any questions?
If there's a couple of questions, I can address them, but I cannot stay too long. Sorry for this.
Okay, no, but that's really nice. So, I mean, up to us. Is there anybody around the table that would like to take this opportunity that Ms. Ana Carla Pereira is with us for another couple of minutes? Any burning questions, something to be clarified, or maybe an additional, let's say, thought or recommendation? Is anybody raising hand? Or anything coming through the chat? Philippe, I don't know whether...
Here's well, it's a question actually in the chat from Ireland, but it's on quite a specific case. It's about the reduction of benefits from an occupational cross-border pension, which was decided without the voice of actually beneficiaries. Apparently it was a result from the global financial crisis, so it was an adaptation to that by the pension provider. But in essence, people who were on a defined benefit pension had their pension reduced, although they were already on a pension, and so they're lacking income to access health and long-term care now. So the question here is whether there's consideration given to raising the voice of pensioners in pension regulations.
But if I may, I can see there is one question from our panelists. It's Ms. Marina Monaco. I will give the floor, and then there is another question from the attendees. So we'll have these three questions. So again, a big thank you for taking your time to respond to them. So now, Ms. Monaco, I give you the floor. You should actually be able to take the floor. In principle, it should work.
You need to unmute yourself, Marina. No, we don't hear you.
No. So maybe in the meantime, I will give the floor. There is another question from among the attendees. I don't know. I don't see the full name. So
it is the question from Ireland.
Okay, so that's the one that was in the chat, right?
Yes, thank you very much for taking my question, and I appreciate the introduction. Just briefly, Philip read out the question. The issue is is the Commission considering pensioners in receipt of pensions and payment to be stakeholders because they saved up for 50 years and then unilaterally their defined benefits were changed? They'd no voice at the table where other people were making decisions about their income, and they reduced their pension without a voice at the table? Thank you.
All right. Can we have back Marina Monaco with your question? Can you now actually, are you unmuted? No, which is still, I mean, so maybe there is also, that's the last one, then we stop. Michel Riquier, you are also raising hands, so please go ahead. I think you can unmute yourself.
2 points which have been raised. One is about employment. All along the span from 62 years up to 67, employment of older workers is something which has to be seen very clearly by the Commission and state. The second point is about portability. All along this span from 62 up to 67, maybe more, that's a problem for people having a job in different countries, and depending before leaving, prepared to retire, they will have to wait several years before getting a full pension. So that's something which is an issue. We bear in mind we have 27 systems within the EU, and the vulnerability of the system are depending not only on the age of retirement, but also conditions of employment of older workers. So it seems to me this point has certainly to be seen very deeply by the Commission and states, of course. Thank you for listening.
Okay, so thank you very much. Now back to you, Anna Carla, if you can just share maybe, respond to some of those comments, questions. And again, thank you for this extra time on your side.
Yes, thank you. Well, on the first question, obviously, I think it's important to acknowledge that the reforms and the changes in national pension systems is something that is done at national level. I mean, the Commission does not intervene in any way in that process, and so obviously the issues of let me call them governance of participation in that reflection at national level is something that needs to be catered for and discussed with the national authorities. Now, what we try to do at the European level is obviously to listen also to civil society and organizations like AGE, which bring the voice of pensioners, also. But we do not have a direct responsibility in the construction of design of the pension systems, and neither on the dialogue that happens at national level. I think obviously in many countries these reforms are also discussed with social partners, and in that respect I think it's important also to make bridges with those that for the moment have a seat at the table on those conversations, so that possibly there is let's say the transmission of the message to the negotiations. I think that's an important aspect of it. But at European level, as I said, we have multiple dialogues and interactions with different stakeholders, not only, let's say, governments or companies, but also trade unions, civil society, and having this broader perspective also allows us to have a better understanding of the realities on the ground. On the point on work of older workers or employment rates of older workers, I think we have seen in the last years an improvement in terms of participation rates and employment rates of older workers. And of course, some of this is strictly linked to the increasing of the pension age, the retirement age in most countries. So if you increase your retirement age, it's almost an automatic effect that you will increase the employment rate of older workers. But I want to come to this almost, because I think obviously one of the difficulties in having quality jobs and quality employment at later stages of the working life is that the working conditions need also to be appropriate for different stages of one's life, right? And this is not necessarily happening. And what we do see is that in some countries there has been an increase in the invalidity pensions, because people, despite the fact that they cannot retire earlier, they do not feel they have the physical conditions to pursue a longer working life, and then they revert to an invalidity pension. So there is definitely an issue of working conditions for older workers that needs to be carefully looked at. It's something that the Commissioner Schmidt has great care for, and I think any discussion around how we can increase the working conditions of older workers and thus support employment to that segment of the population would be very welcome, and we will certainly be happy to engage in that reflection. And then a final point on the portability of pensions and how long this takes. I mean, obviously, the coordination of social security systems is something that is extremely regulated, and there is, a lot of history. The social security coordination regulation or a system has actually celebrated 60 years a couple of years ago. So it's a very long, a very old or a long-standing process of cooperation between countries, but it doesn't mean that it doesn't have its points of improvement, and one of them is definitely the speed at which the results of this coordination actually reach the individual. And so this is certainly a point that I take with me. I don't think I have an answer or a solution to the problem raised, but it's something that over time has been repeated and discussed with the member states. Now, I think one interesting avenue for this is certainly the digitalization of all the systems of coordination, and this digitalization will probably, we hope, accelerate the tasks and the flow between the different countries and the different systems and actors. And this hopefully will then have an immediate impact on those that are, the subject of that coordination. So I leave it at that. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you very much for the additional insights and thoughts. We are looking very much, as you said, the report, the conclusions from this high-level group on the future of social protection. By the way, is this a group which can receive any inputs from outside, or this is an internal reflection just among members of the group?
So it is foreseen that the group will have exchanges with other stakeholders. And of course, this is going to be conducted and organized by the chairperson, Madam Diamantopoulos. And hopefully there will be certainly an occasion to also discuss with Age Platform and other civil society organizations.
Thank you very much then for this opening. So once more, we are then a warm thank you to Ms. Pereira, and now we move then to our first panel discussion. I know that there is an issue with the timing, so if I just may ask our panelists maybe to reduce, we said between 5 and 7 minutes, so if this can fit into 5 minutes, that would be definitely of a help. So without any further delay, in this discussion first session, we will go a bit further on what was already here mentioned by our keynote speaker, gender pension gap, but also the question of intergenerational solidarity, the global view of the social contract. So here, in the order which is in the program, I will give the floor to Mr. Gijsbrecht Dekkers. You represent the Belgian Federal Planning Bureau, but you are also, as it was said, you are the chair of the Social Protection Committee working group on pension adequacy, and you are also carrying this very interesting project, Mind the Gap in Pension in Europe. Therefore, the floor is yours. Please go ahead, and we will of course, use the slides that you have sent us.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to Age Platform Europe for organizing this meeting in the context of the European Retirement Week. I will, in a way, work a bit further on what said Mrs. Pereira and go a bit deeper into the gender pension gap. And there are two things that I would like to start with that are considered to be, let's say, common knowledge. First of all, we know that the gender pension gap at the moment stands at about 27.9% and ranges between 44 and 0.02%, 44 in Luxembourg and 0.2% in Latvia. Now, those are just figures. We shouldn't exaggerate them. For example, in Luxembourg, the gender pension gap will go down from 44% in 2019 to 40% in 2020, just because of a trend breach. So it's a calculation thing. Still, it is high, it is variable. Also, second common knowledge is that the gender pension gap will decrease in the future. But this is actually something you think is common knowledge, because it is. There are actually very few serious simulation studies on the gender pension gap. And so with financial support of the European Commission, we have been have been doing a research project in which we simulated the gender pension gap in an international context. And we did that for Belgium, for Luxembourg, for Slovenia, and for Portugal. And here you see the result. I'm not going to bother you with all the nuts and bolts and everything of it, but it is a micro simulation exercise, more or less the same exercise as we did to project poverty risks in the context of the Pension Adequacy report. So what you need to look at here is indeed the gender pension gap would decline, would decrease, although not necessarily be eradicated. It would go to nearly zero in Slovenia and Portugal, so that's the lower two graphs. But in the upper two graphs, you see Belgium and Luxembourg, and there you can see that it actually, you need to look at the green lines, by the way, you can see that it actually will remain at a certain level, roughly around 10%. And the reason is that the aging working group projections, and those we use as our starting point for the simulations, do not take into account changes in the employment rate, and notably the part-time work rate. And if you, the part-time work rate in Belgium and Luxembourg are actually highly different between men and women. In fact, working part-time in those countries is very much a women thing, even though this is changing. And so as a result of that, you can see that the gender pension gap will not be eradicated. And to make that even more clear, we, in the red result, in the red simulation line, we actually equalized the employment rate and the part-time work rate among men and women from 2021 on. So we imposed that men and women would have the same part-time work rate and the same extensive labor market supply, labor supply. And you see immediately that the gender pension gap drops to 0 in Belgium and even beyond 0 in Luxembourg. And so the first conclusion is indeed that it is the part-time work rate which is higher among women, which will at the end of the day, at the simulation horizon, limit the further decline of the gender pension gap. So other variants, such as the part-time work, the work rate itself, are less important. And even the pay gap, which is also positive at the moment, however declining, will not have as much of an impact as the part-time work rate. And indeed, even though part-time work rates are changing, they are becoming a bit more, men are starting to work a bit more part-time compared to women. It still remains very much a women kind of thing, a bit unfortunate. Also, just a detail, but in the long run, you can see that the gender pension gap in Slovenia would even increase. And the reason is that part-time work rates, participant rates between men and women are nearly equal at the moment in Slovenia. But in the younger generation, women actually are starting to increasingly work part-time. So they are becoming more like their sisters in France, in Belgium, in Luxembourg. And as a result of that, if this behavior will continue in the future, we will see an increase of the gender pension gap at the simulation horizon. Now, if you could take away the graph again, I think we've seen it. General conclusion is clear. Now, why would this be relevant? It is relevant because we would like to avoid having women in retirement with a pension that is too low to guarantee a decent living. And this, as Mrs. Pereira said, indeed is still the case. If you look at older people in general, the poverty risk at the moment is comparable to that of the active population. However, underneath these figures are actually large differences. The poverty risk among older men are lower than that of active population, but the poverty risk among older women, and especially the 75 plus, are higher than that of the active population. And that is becoming a problem, first of all, because there are more with older women. The life expectancies are converging, but not that fast that they can counter this development. And another thing is that we can expect the situation not to get any better in the future. And here I make a reference to the interesting long-term care report, because the long-term care report shows that about 12% of the current active population takes up an informal care task. And this usually goes with a reduction of their labor supply. So people withdraw from the labor market partially or fully in order to take up an informal care task. However, this is much more prevalent among women than among men, and especially at higher age, when people start to take care of elderly relatives or parents and that stuff. The prevalence is actually around 30% of between women and 15% among men. In other words, among the older age groups, where the consequences are higher, and I'll come to that later, the difference between men and women is actually larger than it is among the younger groups. Now, why are the consequences higher? Because the impact of withdrawing fully or partially from the labor market in order to take up a care task by itself is usually covered by the pension system. These coverage can be explicit, like it is in Belgium or in Luxembourg, where you have these care periods or baby years or that kind of stuff. But it can also be implicit, like it is, for example, in Portugal and Slovenia, two countries which do not have any protection, explicit protective measures for those that take up care jobs, but they reduce the number of years that are being taken into account in the career when considering the pensions. This is, for example, 40 years in Portugal and 30 or 31 years, I can't exactly remember, in Portugal. And that means if you are working a full career, save for, let's say, 10 years that you are taking up a care job, this will not affect your pension, or hardly affect your pension. So this is implicit.
1 minute left, just for your information, 1 minute left. I'm
you.
sorry that I have to be
I'll wrap it up, no
nasty.
problem.
Great, thank you very much.
So implicitly, these pension systems do take that into account. What they do not take into account is the fact that if you withdraw fully or partially from the labor market, you will have an earnings penalty for the rest of your career. And that is not taken into account by the pension system, nor in any measure, protective measure in the pension system. We can expect, and I refer here to some studies by the OECD on informal care, that this problem will become much more severe in the decades to come, probably at the expense of women. And so if we do not consider this, the impact of care on pensions, it might actually be that the decrease of the pension gap that we are currently simulating might actually be less positive than we now find. Thank you very much, and I hope I kept within my time.
Thank you very much, and I'm really sorry for being indeed reminding the time limit. Otherwise, we will not make with all the speakers. If you agree, because I know that there are already some questions, some hands that are raised, but can we wait until all the speakers have presented their speeches, so then it will be easier to actually give the same space for everyone. So I will move, and again, thank you very much. It was very unequivocal when you were pleading exactly for the necessity to address the gender inequalities depending on different examples from the 4 countries. So Ms. Marina Monaco from the European Trade Union Confederation, you will, I'm sure, tell us about your recent initiative, this research project, social protection for all. So this probably will underpin your in your intervention on how we can ensure adequate pensions for all generations, and even more important, for all types actually of workers. The floor is yours. Again, if you manage within 5 minutes, that would be great. Otherwise, I will give you a reminder just after five minutes. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much to you for the invitation and for this great panel that you have organized. Actually, the speakers who preceded me have already identified a series of challenges that are at the basis of the positive solutions to the so-called demographic challenge and the so-called challenge of pension adequacy. The thing is, we would like to stress the fact that the population aging in Europe is not a new fact, and it's actually since 2000 and then again in 2010 and 2012 that actually the EU has focused on this topic. The thing is that conditions at the basis for tackling and for ensuring a dignified life across all ages have completely changed. And at the moment, I think that we all face, we are all aware, at least at different levels, from the scientific to the very experience-based one, how even those pensions that seem to be adequate nowadays suffer a very serious decrease in their purchasing power. Pensions are not indexed. In many situations, the pension reforms are changing the rules in a way that impeach anyone to make any clear forecast for the future. And especially it is a trend just to continue picturing the reality of today without looking at the past and the future. The fact that somehow there is a huge discrepancy between the adequacy of the income in old age, if we compare it to the data available in the different reports and at scientific level, and on the other hand, the needs of people in old age, namely the needs for health and long-term care. It is therefore very difficult, and it has been a challenge for the ETUC social research and political team to work on a comprehensive approach to aging that we try to label in a way that is understandable to everyone. We aimed at defining somehow, at providing some defining and also political features related to what we call dignity of aging, let's say somehow to counterbalance the position that is made, let's say the expression that is dominating the EU narrative for almost a decade now, that refers to costs of aging as the most urgent to tackle. In this perspective, I think that we have a series of frameworks that have to be, that we have developed as a European Trade Union Confederation, some working frameworks within which we are going to organize our actions and our policy demands, backed by strong political discussions coming from our national memberships, of course, but also backed by the reflection and the research produced by the experts that are certainly not forced to agree with our position, but are simply curious and keen to look at the social reality as important as the economic one. So a first approach to develop is certainly the right-based one to social protection. So social protection is something people have to right to, and has to be, under that point of view, embedded in the features that will mark the ongoing transitions. We have the environmental transition, we have the digital transition. We definitely have to take into consideration that for Europe, the demographic transition is something that will not be addressed only through the European semester and preventive arm of the European economic governance. We will have to create conditions that ensure the right to decent living, to dignity in aging to everyone. So
Marina, 1 minute left. Okay.
We have to make the European Pillar of Social Rights and its action plan coherently leading the policy areas in which social protection can be taken into consideration. First of all, we have to link it much more strongly with the quality of the labor market. I appreciated the previous presentation, which marked the necessity to look more in depth at the employment rates, because 1 hour per week of employment is definitely not a secure job, which allows social contribution and pension benefits in the future in an adequate way. We will certainly need to reason about a new way of funding social protection, and the upcoming proposals concerning tax reforms and taxation approaches at European level will be extremely useful for that. We will have to take advantage of the progresses that the new EU funds, the new shape, let's say, of the funds will allow to fund not only safety nets and specific measures to foster inclusion and right to an old age and dignity to all people, being them citizens and residents. We also have to monitor that beside the EU budgetary contribution to more social inclusion and better social protection, also the member state budget contributes in a way which is adequate, because facing a transition such as the demographic one in such a small continent like Europe, without allocating the necessary resources as embedded in social and economic plan, is simply out of the realistic way of facing issues. And last but not least, I think that we have to try to learn what to exchange very seriously, given also the novelties proposed right now, just a few days ago, by the last annual Sustainable Growth Survey, a series of frameworks and indicators that are able to combine the economic and the social performances in a way which is comprehensive enough, clear enough, and simple enough to allow governments, stakeholders, and social partners to understand how to better reach the goals of a greener, a more digital and more socially sustainable economy, which is also a right-based one. So we'll have the opportunity now to make a joint effort in order to design the tools to measure, to monitor, to address issues, and to find solutions that are certainly in the hands of the governments of the member states, but we would like to see more and more European level interventions. We have the example of the SURE. We should start thinking and reflecting on the basis of these economic, genuinely European solutions in order to address an issue that is going to be globally relevant. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And again, I'm really disappointed that I have to cut, but again, your message about the complexity, all those puzzles which actually will feed into a comprehensive response. I think that all this can also inform the work, as we heard, of this high-level group on the future of social protection. Thank you very much, Marina, for your intervention. And now I will move then immediately to our next speaker, Ms. Barbara Baringuier, representing the grassroots level organization from France, Les Petits Frères de Pauvres, the Little Brothers of the Poor. You've been over the years very actively fighting all different aspects of poverty and social exclusion, looking at the same time at monetary but also non-monetary aspect. You launched this year a barometer which looks at the impact of the COVID on the most vulnerable older people. So please, the floor is yours. And again, 5 minutes, after which I will just make an announcement of the remaining time. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Barbara. So thanks for the invitation, and I will present you the barometers that we did in Les Petits Frères des Pauvres in this year. And it's the second one we did because we did first in 2017. And so we can compare the numbers, but also we know that the pandemic had some effect about loneliness and social isolation. So we will read you these barometers in 4 years, and we may opt to do it in the European level. So I will share you the main, so first, so Philippe, can you change? So we did this research on a population of 1,500 older people, and we did it by phone. And I think it's very important because we don't want to do it by internet because otherwise we won't have the answer of the older one who don't use internet. So I think it's very important to realize that it's really on the phone, research on the phone. Philippe. And so I will share the key figures and the key findings that we found. So first, the increase of the people in social death. And we call social death all the people who don't have any contact or very few contact during a month. And we have 530,000 of older people in social death in 2021 in the French population. And that's increased a lot because in 2017 it was only 3,000, or not only, but it was quite a lot. And also we found that 2 million of older people think that they are isolated for the both circle of friends and family. So that's a big number. Philippe. So I will share the key finding. Philippe, can you? Yeah. And so first, it's the increase of social isolation in 4 years. The increase of feeling of loneliness, and you will see that we do a difference between loneliness and social isolation. The question of quality of relation and the feeling of isolation. Also, the key finding is that older people are still excluded from the digital world, and then the confirmation of the poverty as an aggravating factor of isolation. So first, Philippe. So first, the increase of social isolation. So the numbers of people who are completely isolated in the 4 cycle, and we say the 4 cycle is the family one, the friendship one, the neighbors one, and the community ones. So increase a lot, and for sure, first it's mechanic, because as the number of elderly people are increasing in France, for sure the number of isolated ones are increased. But also we see that the pandemic increase the number of people who are isolated, and what we saw, and we realized, and we knew it before, but the poor people are the people who are low income, modest housing, and were already so isolated were more isolated due to the pandemic. And we realize also that the loss of autonomy and low income, it's really some accelerator of isolation. So that's where the first funding. Philippe, you can change. And then one of the finding is that the feeling of loneliness increased, but what we saw is that this feeling of loneliness increased amongst the people who are younger. So it's more of a 60 to 65 and more of a feeling to be lonely, and also the people who have not low income, but more income. Because the fact is, during the pandemic, those people who were used to do some activities, were used to go outside and see their friends, during the pandemic, for sure, they were more lonely. So we see that the correlation between, so the difference between loneliness and social isolation, and then the fact that when we are more, we have more money, we can do more activities. And it's why during this time of the year, during those period, those who had more income feel more lonely, but they were not socially isolated. They were just feeling lonely. And it's a big difference. Okay, Philippe. Also, one of the findings that we found, it was the question of the quality of the relationship. And what we found is that a lot of older people, 6.5 million over 60 years and older, they are isolated because they don't have anyone to really have a confidence and truly conversation with those people. So they can maybe have, you know, the neighbors, they say hello, goodbye, how are you? But they have no one to have a true conversation and have confidential conversation. And this is a factor of loneliness and isolation. And so when we measure the relationship, we have to consider the quality of those relationship, and it's very important. Okay, Philippe.
Barbara, just 1 minute left.
Okay, so I will finish very soon. So one of the findings that we knew it's the people, more people are excluded of the digital world, and this is really linked to income and age. More older you are, less you use internet, more income you have, you use less internet. And also, I think if we want to do a link between the first people who spoke during the conference, I think it's also, you know, the career you had. If you had a big career, you used to use internet. If you are a low worker, you don't use internet during your career, and so when you get older, you don't use it. And so even during the pandemic, the Zoom meeting and everything didn't really replace a real face-to-face meeting, but it helped people to be less isolated. So, you know, more older, the people who didn't use the internet during this period was very, very isolated, and this is very important. And the last, Philippe, and the last big funding, and we knew it, and you can change, it's that the confirmation that poverty is an aggravating factor of isolation, and less money you have, more you are willing to be socially isolated. And it was important, and I think I found out this on a Red Cross research, that they say that when you are 50 to 65, you enter poverty through isolation, and when you're from 75 to 85, you're entering isolation through poverty. So it's really the link between poverty and social isolation is there, and it's why we have to be sure that older people get better pension and better income to be able to do things and to go out and do things and meet friends and you know, have activities. So yes, you can change. So just to conclude is, as you know, social isolation is multi-factors, but it's for sure that the less autonomy, less income the people have, and the older they are key factor that increase social isolation amongst the others. So thanks a lot. If you want to read all the research is on our website, is in French. It's more than 100 pages, but it's very interesting. And I invite you to read it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Barbara. Well, making this in a very quick way, simplifying, but what you are actually telling us is that actually those who were already excluded before the pandemic, they became even further excluded because of the pandemic. So, I mean, the message is very clear, and why there is a need for actions to help these specific subgroups of older population. Last but not least, Miss Anne-Sophie Parent, representing all the women's network Europe. Anne-Sophie Parent, you have been Secretary General of Age Platform Europe for the longest time of the existence of our organization. Since last year, you actually are continuously working on the issues in relation to dignity, old age, also equality, specifically from the perspective of older people. Pensions is one of the topics that you are involved. Until last year, you were representing age at the high-level group on supplementary pensions. So I presume that even we've already extensively covered this morning already, well, this afternoon, the question of age equality, gender pension gap, but I'm sure you will have further insights on this topic for us. The floor is yours.
Thanks a lot, Maciek, and thanks to all the previous speakers. I would like to just build on what they have said, and going back to the pension adequacy report that Anna Carla presented this morning, so the latest edition. I must say, I want to build what the few issues I want to raise with you around this report. In particular, for those of you who do not know this report in detail, it provides a very useful tool, a very good overview of the trends in pension reforms in terms of the adequacy, which is by looking at the risk of poverty faced by both women and men, as well as the replacement rate. So how much money, disposable income do they get compared to what they used to have before retirements? And they also look at the evolution over time. So are the pensions, the oldest pensions, eroding so much? Are they still adequate or so? And for that, they use two profiles, which is a full-time, full career, so 40 years, something we don't really a part career profile and the challenges faced by significant groups of the population, among whom oldest women. And since I'm speaking here as a representative of Older Women's Network Europe, I will focus very much on the gender dimension. You know, it's my favorite topic. The good thing is that this report, the Pension Adequacy Report, gives much more attention compared to previous editions. And this has to do with the MyGap project, has to do with quite a lot of work that has been done by the Social Protection Committee and the European Commission. And I was so pleased to hear that former Commissioner Diamantopoulou is back and active in this in the topic of social justice. It enables them to share their data to see whether they are addressing different inequalities or difficulties. But it also enables them, although they are looking at broad data, it enables them to identify some specific groups who are facing huge challenges. Because the objective of pension reforms may have two different objectives. Improving the situation of future generations of pensioners, both men and women, but also making sure that the current generations of pensioners are not suffering from the impact of pension reforms, which is the case for the moment, in particular for older women and older female workers, since the introduction of some reforms which tend to connect much more strongly the paid contribution and the benefits you get out from your pensions. This means that some groups of women, in particular the low incomers, those who have had broken careers, those who have not always been able to claim contribution to social protection because they were helping their spouse, for example, and all those, when you add them, it is quite a significant number of women. It means that those older women are facing huge challenges. So the current generations of older female workers and women who have retired are facing actually a higher disadvantage than what can be seen from the average pension gap that is presented, the gender pension gap, which may have improved in some countries, it was said, but Anna Carla told us they have identified that it's not working exactly how it should be. And my question to you, and I hope this
I think we lost you, Anne-Sophie. You are frozen, at least on my
to
side.
be addressed by the, yeah, we should really pay more attention to those most vulnerable among the groups that face difficulties. We know that the single women, for example, and in particular divorced women, are really facing challenges. The system in place is not enabling them to live in dignity when they retire. So this needs to be improved. And we should also remember that if those older female workers or retired women have had career breaks, this was not a choice. We cannot call it employment choice. And I'm sure here Gaze is going to smile because it's something I've been saying in the MyGap advisory group. Those were imposed on them. So they should be compensated, although it is too late for them to contribute more to the system. Another thing I would like to highlight just to conclude, because I am sure that Maciek is keen to move to the question time. Why don't we try to develop a proper methodology to assess whether a pension is adequate or not, both for male and female, and depending on the age or dependency level? Why don't we organize monitoring of a baskets of goods and services which would be adapted to the reality of a retired person, in particular if the person becomes dependent? Then immediately everyone will understand that the current, even average pensions, and in particular of most women, is far from being enough to cover your long-term care needs. And yet women live a few years longer, but often in poor health and alone. So for them, the situation is really dramatic and needs to be addressed. And then when we build this basket of goods and services, we shouldn't forget the impact of new environmental policies, which are introducing mandatory removal of the very old oil stove heater that you have in your home, and as well as making sure that you make your house more insulated, for example, or that. Those are very high costs that all of a sudden you need to change also your car, because in a few months' time, you will not be allowed to drive into Brussels with an old dirty car. And that's very logical to do that. But what kind of impact does this have on an older widow who had the old car left by her husband and thought she would be at least able to use this until the end of her life? So I would be more than happy if more work is done as well on gender equality for all age groups, pre-retired workers, but as well as those who have retired already for a long time, but really struggle today. Thank you very much.
Sophie, a big thank you for this reminder. It's true, for how many years we've been actually promoting this idea of coming with a basket of goods and services, which would actually help to approach the question of adequacy of old age income, really taking into the consideration the real needs of, as you said, a very diverse group of older persons, even among older women. You mentioned, for example, those who are widows, becoming dependent. So, I mean, the situation is extremely diverse, looking at different specific personal situations. So we take this because actually probably this is right now the right moment, again, with this high-level group on the future of social protection to remind this. So thank you very much. Now I feel so frustrated, and I'm also looking at Philippe, because I don't know how you will manage the next session, and it's really part of my responsibility for this delay. Although I mean, a real thank to all of our speakers for sharing all different, not only insights but only solutions. Can we have 2 questions from the floor, at least, because otherwise it's a real pity. So if you've got questions, please be as specific as possible. It's not to make an announcement, just if you've got something to be asked to one of our 4 speakers, that's your chance. We will take 2 questions. There is, I can see Michel Riquier, you are raising hand, go ahead.
A point raised by Barbara is about the digital gap. That's something which is crucial today, and the danger will increase all along the coming years. Might be positive initiative from the Commission to request an alternative solution for all services only based on digital. That's something which is developing in France. All public services you can access through internet. If you want to buy a railway ticket, we have less and less stations which are open. So the internet is quite the only solution for you to buy a ticket or weekly or monthly card. So that's something, that's a message which has to be addressed. I don't know the situation in other countries within the EU, but as far as France is concerned, it's more and more a danger for older persons. So that's something which is, from my point of view, and not only my point of view, but what Barbara raised, that's something which is digital gap is an increasing factor for isolation for older persons. So that's something which is certainly key, and the Commission has to do something to push a solution, alternative solution to full digital. I have a question also to guess about his curve about Luxembourg. The red curve is breaking at 0 and then going down up to 65. So in concrete terms, what does it mean when you have a curve which is going below 0? Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much. So the question is addressed to one specific speaker, or are you launching, Michel, just this question to anyone among our? So is anybody that would like, I don't know, from your Barbara perspective, something that can be here maybe complemented on the digitalization and the exclusion?
I think Michel is right, and more services are online, but in the good news is the number of people who are not using internet is not increasing, is like flat right now, because I think we should also remember that the older one, it will be us very soon. So we are using internet. So I think we have to be careful about the older one who will stop to use internet, even if they used before. But this number is not increasing. That's the good news, I think, if we want to be a little optimistic here.
But of course, I mean, we will be raising this issue, for example, in the current discussion of the European Commission on the digital decade. So this question of basic internet skills among older people, this is one of those vectors, channels through which we can actually improve as well inclusion of older persons. So point taken. There is anybody else from the speakers? I can see that yes, Mr. Deckers is appearing on the screen.
A very quick answer to the question by Mr. Ruquier. You can indeed see that the gender pension gap in this simulation variant in Luxembourg would become negative, which basically means that under these theoretical circumstances that women have the same labor market supply, they have the same part-time work rates and everything else, men would have a lower pension on average than women from let's say 245 on. And the reason is that Luxembourg is a bit of a peculiar country in the sense that it is highly dependent on high educated level workers. It has an extensive financial financial sector. And it has also today a bit of its particular labor market. It has a large group of low educated individuals and a very large group of high educated individuals. And the education level of women is actually increasing faster than that of men. I'm not telling you anything new when I say that. And so we expect in our simulations that under these circumstances, if men and women work the same and same part-time, etc., that in fact the productivity of women will increase beyond that of men, and indeed that we will end up in the very, very, very long run in a gender pension gap, which will be the opposite.
Thank you very much. I can see there are there is a question from Ms. Giuseppina Corda. I don't know if we can unmute you or whether you got already the mic.
Do you hear me?
Go ahead.
Do you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Yeah. Okay. I was wondering if something was prepared to calculate the pensions of the youngest. They now go everywhere to work, not only in their home country. So what are they going to do? Is there something prepared for them to calculate the pension they accumulated from working in Finland, from working afterwards in Spain, etc.? Is there going to be a system to assist them to reassemble everything?
Anne-Sophie, I think you've got already probably
Yes.
A comment or response to it. Go ahead.
Yeah, a response to that. Now this is organized for the statutory pensions among all the EU member states. The data is collected and shared, so you build your pension rights wherever you're working, and at the end you will just get it from where you will be residing as a pensioner, but it will be coordinated and paid for from the different places you have contributed to. So there is nothing lost. And this is really supporting very much workers' cross-border mobility. It works also for most occupational pensions. Then for the private pensions, there is work ongoing for the moment because it is a bit more tricky. This is more like a personal type of insurance in a way, if you want. But it is being worked upon, and the objective is really to get it to have a system where all your pension rights will be saved, and the information will be made available both to you, to the worker themselves, and at the end to the system who will have to organize the payment of your pension rights when they retire. So it's work ongoing for those personal pensions, but for the others, it's already working very well. And I can really tell you it works because it applied to me as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And last, Claude Warret, this is the last question that we take on board, and then we close the session. Therefore, I don't know, Claude, are you unmuted? Are you still with us? For sure, go ahead.
Do you hear me?
Yes.
It's all right now. Okay. Thank you very much, Maciek. First of all, it's a comment. A study was recently carried out by INSEE, which is a governmental statistic body in France, and it showed that the pay gap with the same job between men and women is 5%. So at the end of the day, when you look at it, you say, okay, the main issue, one of the main issues, not the only issue, is promoting women. Because if you promote women, they get the same jobs as the men. And let's say they don't do additional tasks. Okay, I know, it's not the only thing. Then you have only 5% difference.
Claude, you've got a question, or was it just a statement that you wanted to make?
It's a comment.
It's a comment, right. Anne-Sophie, would you like to react on this?
Yeah, my question to Claude, why should there still be 5% for equal work? France is known to be indeed quite advanced compared to other countries in terms of paying the same for equal work. But still, believe me, in reality, it's more than 5%. And for the moment, it reflects into a bigger pension gap because the former generations of women had to suffer much, much bigger pension gaps. And you still have a very heavy social pressure, although childcare is very well organized. And so in France, women are not always picking the same jobs. And when they do, they would go more often on part-time just because they want to have a life with their families and it is expected on them. And COVID has shown that there are huge differences in terms of crisis management as well with family, reconciling family and work.
Yeah, so 5% is a prison, is what happens today, but it can be changed. And I think there is a cultural issue. So we
absolutely.
have to culturally.
Absolutely. Fully agree with you, Claude.
Yeah, it's also a training of young girls. And so on. Okay, I stop there. Thank you.
Yes. Thank you for your comments. Sorry that we cannot dig more into details on specifically on this. Philippe, I want to close now the session and hand over to you for the next one. I see that you've got your hand raised. Is it to comment something on this session, or is it already to take over for the follow-up?
No, it was actually to react to the question by Giuseppina. Because what Anne-Sophie was also referring to, there's a pilot project of different pension insurances, both public and second pillar, to actually link the information and put them online, which is called the European Tracking Service Project. And I just wanted to highlight that they have also an event during this week. They will have it on Friday. From 10 to 12, and I'm posting the link in the chat so that if you want to know where this project is standing, you can go there. And I also want to encourage all of you to see the other events of the European Retirement Week and to participate there. Although there will be, as we already said, much less questions of first pillar pensions, rather quite a focus on second and third pillar.
All right, so Philippe, actually you can jump immediately into your role of moderator of the next session for this one. Again, thank you very much to all the four speakers. I think that we brought some extra thoughts about exactly how our pension systems can be made fairer in the context of demographic aging and looking at all those different specificities. I think if there's one lesson that we are taking is that there is no one fit for all solution, because actually the diversity of personal situations, realities, once we become pensioner in relation to our income, access to services, I mean, it's something very, very diverse between different people. So thank you very much. And now up to you, Philippe, for the session number 2 on supplementary pensions.
All right, so thank you. As I said, a lot of the attention of the European Retirement Week is on supplementary pensions, simply because a lot of the promoters are private insurers or are well active in the management of assets, so they take this rather financial service perspective. We already said pensions are a function of social security, and where this is outsourced to either to private pensions or to collective agreements in forms creating second pillar pensions, there it is actually fulfilling a function of the state, which is to support this right to dignified old age income. It has often said that supplementary pensions are a solution to tackle the financial impact of demographic change. There's something that we still recently, well, actually still currently see in Commission documents and many other stakeholders interventions. So they were quite pushed in the past. There's clear European competence in these areas. There's a directive on institutions for occupational retirement, for example. There's an oversight authority called EIOPA, which oversees at least the largest occupational pensions and sets rules for financial management there. And there are projects on third pillar pensions as well. The Pan-European personal pension product is a third pillar product. There's a directive which has been adopted to introduce them, and they should be introduced in the course of the next year, if I'm not mistaken. So there has also been a lot of regulatory effort going into setting up this financial product, which is purely a private product. We wanted to go back to the question of this actually, that these products are not products like other savings products because of this social function, and that the question of whether it is actually beneficial for public finances to push for these is actually not solved. And this is why we invited Mr. Pacolet here, who has been part of the social research project, but not only, if I believe, and you have done some research into the costs of supplementary pensions. I can already announce that our second speaker from age member CNA Pensionati had some technical issues and then some urgent meetings, so he's not participating, which eases a little bit our delay, but we will probably still be a little bit over time. So I apologize for that in advance. But first, Josef, please.
Yes, thank you for inviting me for this meeting. I am somewhat surprised to be here because my very first research I did in 1974 was on consumer protection in Europe. And so I discover now that BEUC is one of the partners of this initiative. And for more than 25 years, I have been teaching organization of of the banking industry because I made a PhD on competition and economies of scale in the banking industry. So I should have been on the scene the complete week because I am all the time I have been very much interested in the financial industry. But that's not my great concern today. It's about, and I was surprised even by hearing Mr. Kuzjasdik saying immediately that we are talking about the three-pillar system. I would add to it, perhaps we should even talk about a four-pillar system because individual housing, your home ownership is also an important component of income security when getting older. But should we include them all to discuss about pensions? Just give the example of the Belgian Commission on the Reform of the pension system. Those experts said some years ago, the third pillar, individual pension saving, is not part of the pension system. I must admit that with so much history in the financial industry that I remained all the time very much in favor of all kinds of supports of individual saving, being it precautionary saving or be it lifetime saving or even being it bequest saving. I think bequests are very much of concern also of all the persons. It's a kind of intergenerational saving. So I am in favor that we can find reasons to support it and that those financial products exist. But my concern is, can we afford it with the public financing? So my concern is about the adequacy of pensions from the point of view of how can we finance it? And for that reason, I want to concentrate on the first and the second pillar. And my concerns are, first of all, that the first pillar is in problem. It is not guaranteed or is not improving in many countries. That's the first financial need. The second is that the second pillar does not come without a cost. And even the third concern for me is, and part of the discussion in the rest of the seminar this afternoon, or perhaps even in the complete week, is can we, with better solvency regulations or better protection of the consumers, can we guarantee that second or third pillar systems will deliver on the main problem that we have to solve, adequate income for the present group of pensioners and for the future group of pensioners. Making first comment on the evidence that we do have, and bringing up evidence is to a large extent the benefit of this really very nice thing. And Gijs, I have to compliment you all the time that I see you, these very nice flagship reports of the Pension Adequacy report or the aging report or Pension at a Glance report of the OECD. What I learned from, not from the adequacy report, but I learned it from the aging report, is that the first pillar is in danger. And I called it in my report for the ETUC Brussels, we have a problem. When I read the projections of the aging report, and we see that for the EU27, the share of the population above 65 will increase from 20% now to 30% by 2070, but that the share of GDP that we will allocate to pensions will remain over that same period from now around 10.7. It will remain on the level of 10.8 by 2070. So there is not at all any following the growth of the expenditures for pensions with the demographic need. And we could call the aging report as the inadequacy report on social protection. Perhaps the situation that seems to be very dramatic is over dramatic, is not so dramatic in real terms, because by 2070, probably the pension age will not be 65, but it will probably already be closer to 70. So the group of concern is not the 30% of people above 65, it will be a lower group. But nevertheless, there is an urgent need for additional financing the first pillar, not only tomorrow, but already for today, to reassure, and that we learn very well from the Pension Adequacy report, to avoid poverty, but also to provide a decent replacement rate for the rest of the population. The second point of concern then is, can we afford a second pillar? And some of the debates about solvency regulation or about transparency of products of the second pillar, getting value for money, is about the quality of those products, of those financial products. But I should quote and rephrase Bertolt Brecht, erst kommt das Fressen und dann kommt die Moral. First comes the full stomach and then comes ethics, or what I mean here is, before we discuss the quality of those second pillar system, we should first take notice of what is the quantity of those systems. Very recently, only very recently, Eurostat provides in the national accounts a new table, and I am a macroeconomist, so I read with a lot of pleasure national accounts. It's a new table 29 on the accurate to-date pension entitlements in the social pension schemes, including the public scheme, including the scheme for the civil servants, and including the mandatory voluntary occupational pension schemes. We learned from this new table in the national accounts that the total spending on pensions is some 12% of GDP. We know that for long. We read it every 3 years in the aging report. Out of this total 10.8% is the public pay-as-you-go scheme. And only only. The rest, 1.2% of GDP, is the relative importance of the funded pension schemes for the total population in Europe. It is higher in some countries. The Netherlands is the great example. But for the total population of Europe, this second pillar, where we talk all the time about, is only 1/12 of the total spending. There has been a promotion of this product for decades. The real success is only 1/12 of the total spending for. My conclusion when I observing that, we are not in most of the countries not talking about the three-pillar system. We should perhaps not even talk about the third pillar because it's just individual saving. But in most of the countries, there is not even a substantial second pillar. It is a minor part of the pension insurance. And the question then is, it's perhaps too late to start with it. It's certainly also, and the promoters of this financial product are also probably completely agreeing with me that it is too little. I think it's both, it's too little and too late to rely on the second pillar. It's too late, certainly, because those funded schemes, you cannot solve the problem of the present generation of elderly, of the near future generation of elderly. The problem is if it can solve the issue for the later in time. And there, my main concern, and I think it's the concern also of those, as for instance, the group here that Finance Watch that I discovered in this panel, or Beuk, does it provide value for money? How expensive is that? And there is, yeah.
Excuse me, Joseph. I'm very sorry, but we need to compress a little bit. So if you can have just 1 or 2 more minutes.
I have two conclusive remarks on this second and last mention of the second pillar. The first is that the fiscal expenditure for the second pillar are substantial. And in the Pension Adequacy report, there is a growing, in the last issue, a growing concern about the role of fiscal expenditures that is topping up the cost of the second pillar. We see there that it is forgotten, and that implies that the cost is higher than we normally expect. Just give an example for Belgium. We are spending some or contributing some 7 million euro to the second pillar. 3.5 billion is needed for as a fiscal expenditure. And I come then to my last remark on the availability and the value for money of a second pillar solution is the issue of administrative costs. The service cost of those products that again are demonstrated clearly in the table 29 of the national accounts. I give you in the Netherlands the example, 1% of GDP is needed to serve the second pillar. Imagine what it could add to the financing of the first pillar. Just give an example for Belgium, for a total second pillar financing of 1.5% of our GDP yearly. We need 0.2% of servicing costs, administrative costs, that is topping up with the costs that we, for money that we need for which you don't get real value. That's my main comment I wanted to make on the feasibility of a second pillar to guarantee adequate income when we are getting old.
Okay, thanks a lot, Joseph. Very interesting points here. I just as the former panel, I propose to have a discussion afterwards. So without delay, I will introduce you to Thierry Philippona from Finance Watch, age as an associate member of Finance Watch since 2 years now, I think. And we're mainly interested, we're mainly contributing to Finance Watch's work on financial inclusion. But here is not the question of financial inclusion, although this is a huge problem. But I invited you to give us an overview about where the discussions are about sustainable finance, because essentially these second and third pillar products are financial products in which money is put and this is then invested into certain assets. And just because, well, one of the fundamental values of age is solidarity between generations, and solidarity towards our younger generation also means that our members are interested in leaving a world which is fit for living for our grandchildren. And we know that money is needed for that, investments are needed for that, but that money is also can also be a way to prevent this. And most pensioners do not really have the choice, or future pensioners do not really have the choice of the financial products they invest into, because it's invested by the employer, or because it's quite regulated and they don't have so many funds to choose from. So there's a sustainability agenda on EU level to make finance more sustainable, to make finance contribute to this big transformation. And we wanted to know, where is this discussion, and well, can we expect these financial services to actually also deliver for future generations in terms of the environment they live in? So Thierry, you're working on sustainable finance for Finance Watch. So please, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Philippe. Very happy and honored to be with you today and share a few thoughts. Also conscious of the challenge of addressing such a huge issue in 5-7 minutes. So I'll do my very best to try to come to the essence of it. The first thing is, and this is not about being about gloom and doom, but it's absolutely vital to remember that the world we live in, as it functions today, is not sustainable. And this is not the European world, it's the global economy that is not sustainable. And it's not me saying it, it's look at what the IPCC is telling us. The IPCC is telling us that we're on a path of global warming comprised between 3.7 and 4.8 degrees at the end of the century. And the consequence of such global warming will be floods, rising sea levels, droughts, wars, migrations, you name it. There was a very interesting scientific piece of research that came out about a month ago, not from the IPCC, but scientific as well, saying that 3 billion people at the end of the century will live in uninhabitable parts of the world. 3 billion. What do people do when they live in a place which is uninhabitable? Well, they move, they migrate. It's normal. That's, yeah. That will have huge consequences. So the world as it is today is not sustainable. So what do we do in the face of that? We know there's many initiatives to try to mitigate, or well, first of all, mitigate and then adapt to a different world. And clearly the sustainable finance agenda is a very important piece in that field. We also have to say that with all its imperfections, and it is far from being perfect, the European sustainable finance agenda is, without boasting in a very naive and stupid manner, probably the most ambitious in the world. Not saying that very interesting things are not being done elsewhere. You know, there are very interesting initiatives elsewhere, but a lot of things happening in the EU. So I would like to start to, and I like the way you put the question to me, you know, can pension savers choose a better world for their grandchildren? Which is a very, at the end of the day, it's the essential question. It's the main question. And just answering that question, we can give 2 dimensions to sustainable finance. The first dimension is, can investing in activities and assets and entities that are considered as sustainable derive a better return on the money invested. And this is really very close to what Joseph was saying. You have to start with a full stomach. I mean, if you don't have the money, you're not going to be in good shape. And then there is another dimension to sustainable finance: is can sustainable finance contribute to changing the world towards sustainability? And if you think about it, we just defined two very different conceptions of sustainable finance. One conception is that sustainable finance would be about getting exposure to assets and entities and activities that are considered as sustainable. So in that conception, you need to define what sustainability means. And you may have heard, and many of us have heard, about the EU taxonomy of sustainable activities, which taxonomy is just another word for classification, as we'll know. So it's just a classification of economic activities and defining criteria to say, okay, this activity is sustainable if it reaches that threshold, and it is not sustainable if it doesn't reach that threshold. And once you've done that, any exposure to that activity will be considered as sustainable. And the logic behind it is that, well, one of the logics is that everything else being equal, sustainable activities and entities should be less risky and or provide better returns than unsustainable activities. Because by definition, apologies for stating the obvious, but we should always keep it in mind, if something is not sustainable, it will not prosper. Even if I'm completely cynical and I don't care about the future of the world, I'm the most selfish person on this planet, if it's not sustainable, it is not going to prosper. I mean, as simple as that. So you won't get the money. But there's a much more ambitious and, in my view, much more interesting conception of sustainable finance, is that it should orient capital to the companies that are investing for a sustainable future. It should provide the capital to those companies, not only that are green, so to speak, or sustainable today. And when I say green, that's really a shortcut. We should really say sustainable, and sustainable from an environmental and a social standpoint. The social standpoint is obviously absolutely essential. So once we've defined what that means, orienting capital to those companies is essential. And not only to companies that are sustainable today, but also, and more importantly, because we said that the world as it is not sustainable, companies that are investing to become sustainable tomorrow. Because really the real challenge is there. It's not to invest in the very limited number of companies that are sustainable today. It's to invest in the companies that, and you cannot blame them for that, it's the way the world is, that are not sustainable today, but have realized it and are investing to become sustainable tomorrow. And there are many initiatives I could talk about for literally hours behind that, but what counts here in this discussion is the logic. And there's a big debate out there about, should you have just the conception of sustainable finance is about the impact of the socio-environment on the accounts, on the cash flows of the companies, or should it be also about the impact of the company on the environment? That's so-called, in the sustainable finance jargon, there's a lot of jargon in that field. It's called double materiality. So outside in financial materiality, impact of the world on the company, and inside out, environmental and social materiality, impact on the company on the outside world. We're lucky in the EU to be working on developing everything on the concept of double materiality. So we're taking into account, the impact of the company on the outside world on top of the impact of the outside world on the company. But the world is complex, and I'll finish on this because I'm conscious of time. I would say that the sustainable finance agenda is indispensable. It's a good step in the right direction. So there's no doubt that pension savers should invest in assets that are considered as sustainable in as defined with the EU regulation. And here again, we could have very long technical discussions about those definitions, but the principle is there. But at the same time, we have to keep in mind that if this is necessary, it will not be sufficient. It will not be sufficient, but because there's two other dimensions that we need to take into account, even three. One dimension is that we need the public policies from policymakers from all countries and all political parties to change the rules of the game, because financiers at the end of the day adapt to the world as it is. And sustainable finance cannot replace the right social and environmental policies. This is the first thing. We also need a so-called sustainable corporate governance. In other words, the rules giving the incentives and the obligations for the companies, the businesses, the issuers to behave sustainably. And I have to say that in that field, I'm quite, sorry, I don't like to be like that, but pessimistic today, because, you know, the EU Commission, European Commission wanted to put a proposal on the table last June. It had been delayed to this month of December now, just starting today. And now we just found out this morning that it's now delayed to at least next March. And the reason behind this is huge lobbying from business organizations who do not want to see rules applied to companies for them to be incentivized or sometimes have obligations to be sustainable. That makes me really pessimistic behind all the lip service to we love sustainability. Everybody says this every day, I mean, nowadays, but the reality is that there's huge lobbying against sustainability beyond the nice words. And the third dimension is that we have to reflect, when it comes to sustainable finance, about the fact that building a sustainable world is a medium to long-term enterprise. So we should reflect which financial products and which financial instruments bring capital to companies with a long-term perspective. Because some of them do not bring capital to companies at all, and many financial products do not, and some of them do. And some of them do on a very short-term basis. So we have to combine the sustainability of economic activities, which is what we're doing now, with the ability of financial products to bring capital to companies so they have time to work and invest, because you don't change a company overnight. If you want to go from being a cement producer emitting a lot of CO2 to being a cement producer emitting no CO2, well, you need several years and probably quite a number of years of research and investment to change the way you produce your cement. It doesn't happen overnight. I'll stop here because, you know, it's a huge topic, but, you know, please launch me and ask me questions if you want to explore further. Thank you.
Thank you, Thierry. Thank you for sticking to your time. I'm afraid we won't have time for a long discussion. I'm just reading the chat and discovering what is there.
Well, there's a bunch of comments, but they are maybe not directly related to the last two interventions. So there was no like a question incoming to either Joseph or to Thierry, but okay. Of course, maybe now,
do we have live questions? You may raise your hand if you want. I know we lost a couple of attendees, probably because we are over time. Michel, please.
Yes, thank you, Thierry, for this presentation. Could we say, for instance, investing in the second pillar based on financial product, that's a way to spend money for coming generation? I mean, the first pillar is based on the current economy and state involvement in trying to protect older person for the future after retirement. And the part of the investment made in financial product, that's a sort of cooperation between generation, current generation having worked and preparing the future for the coming generation through investment, and they only receive the dividend, the earnings from the investment which are being made good or not. I mean, efficient or not. Does it make sense to you?
Yes, it does. It does make sense. It does make sense. I have no doubt that all the money invested by pension savers, if they go into properly defined sustainable assets or entities, contribute to building a better world. I'm not saying that it's a miracle solution. I'm not saying everything is saved overnight, but it is certainly, a way in the right direction. And as I was saying, both for the return of those investments and also for contributing, maybe it's a drop in the ocean, but it's a drop in the ocean going in the right direction. And that is something indispensable. And something we've been pushing for, and we are pushing for at Finance Watch, is that for pension savers, if you think about the number of schemes, and there are plenty of them, and there's plenty of much better expert than I am of pensions on this panel, there should be the default option for investing should be in sustainable products, sustainable finance product. If there is a default option, it should be in a sustainable finance product. And this is very important because the reality of the investment world is that default option becomes the option of many, many people. So just by doing that, you would drive huge flows of investment towards sustainable activities, and it would be a very significant contribution to what we're describing. Here again, without being naive, without saying that the world will be saved just because of that, but at least if we all contribute, it will be something. I hope that makes sense.
Thank you. Then we have a question by Anne-Sophie.
Yes, it's a question to both of you, Joseph and Thierry, actually, because listening to you, I was just wondering, when we were busy with the high-level group on pensions report, we heard a lot about the administrative cost, all the related costs. Better Finance actually does always a very good study on that to show that it is not always, the money is not always placed where it should go and where it should deliver best results for the saver. But how can we help ensure that even those with low income, so very small saving capacity to invest in complementary pensions, how to make sure that all the money they invest there is not going to be wasted on administrative costs, lost, and so on. The example of the Netherlands is quite good for those very small pension pots where they have enabled them to group them and to save on administrative costs. But I was really quite interested by the argument you raised, Joseph, about the very high administrative costs compared to what it brings to the savers. So yeah, I have my own personal understanding, which goes really along your side. But if really the only answer to a decrease, a sharp reduction of the first pillar, the public statutory pay-as-you-go system, is that we have to encourage, force workers to save and other products, how can we make sure we have really an adequate supply of safe, sustainable, and environmentally sustainable products? I still refer to the Irish colleagues who was explaining that in Ireland, really many older persons lost all their private savings because of the crisis of 2008. We shouldn't forget that this can happen overnight. So how can we make sure that this will not happen again?
Well, the pension debate is about pensions, adequate pensions at a reasonable level for the total population. Low-income groups, poorer people don't have the capacity to save during their complete life, and certainly not when they are retired. So they don't have individual savings. They don't have, probably not in the industries where they are working, because sometimes they are unemployed. They don't have any voluntary additional pension scheme. They do not have their own house, so they do not benefit from all those additional products. Nevertheless, I am in favor that the state supports the saving ambition of a population, but it must be taken into consideration with the other needs for public financing. And there, the first pillar is the best investment for an adequate pension for the present and the future generation. I am very much sympathizing with a debate about sustainability of our planet and the greening of our society, but we should not take it as an alibi to miss the debate on pensions. And there, because I know that story for decades. In Belgium, for instance, at a certain moment, the pension funds came with the story, our pension funds will invest in our Belgian economy. Later on, they changed the narrative and said, no, we are going to invest in the third world and we will support the rest of the developing countries. And now the story is, by accident, my bank is annoying me every day because they want to replace my saving accounts by banking products by sustainable products with the same low real return, with the same high service costs, but with a green color. And I don't even call it greenwashing, because the banking industry and the pension fund industry is indeed changing towards sustainability, not because they became ethical bankers, but because society in its regulation, in its growing awareness of a need for climate change, avoiding the climate problems, and more intense environmental regulations. That is what is creating sustainability and sustainability activities for the rest of for the coming decades, not because pension functions are changing opinion. So we should not mix the debate of greening and greenwashing, perhaps. I'm very cynical from time to time, of greening the pension funds with the real debate. Is it not too little and too late? And is it not too costly to organize adequate pensions for all the population, for the total population, with second and third pillars? Remembering, but not I am the expert, our Belgian Committee of Reform of the Pension, they are the experts of pensions. They said to me, and they were very clever economists in that group, second, third pillar, individual pension saving is not, or individual saving is not pension provision. It is just saving, but as a financial economist, I am in favor of savings, of course. Just a closing remark. Already 25 years ago, I had a chapter in my course on organization of financial institutions. There was a chapter on ethical banking, and some of my students looked at me, how can he be so naive? So I still am so naive, but I am very cautious about the role of the first pillar, and that's the most important, and he is at problem for the moment.
Thank you, Joseph. We're quite over time, so I don't know if Thierry wants to react to that.
There would be so many things to say. I think we can stop here, but I would share a lot of what Joseph said. This is we have to strike the right balance. It's the debate about greenwashing. I mean, there's two dimensions to greenwashing. Are financial participants doing what they say they're doing? That's the first conception. Second conception is what they're doing impactful, effective? And those two things are very different. And yes, I agree that if you said sustainable finance 15 years ago, the financiers you would be talking about would have been laughing. I mean, what are you talking about? Sustainable finance, this is the real world. Now, not one financier will not say he or she is not doing sustainable finance. Now, once that, the rhetoric, and I think it's great evolution, because in the reality of this world, if you want to move things, you have to go from denial to recognition, and then from recognition to doing. And we're just in the middle of the river. we left the bank on which everybody was saying, look, finance is not about sustainability, two different topics, thank you very much. Now everybody's saying, it's the same thing, which it is not. But at least there is the verbal recognition, and now with all the work to do so that it can be impactful. So, this is my high level reaction, but we have quite a number of years of work to reach there. And frankly, that would, if we had the time, that would dovetail with what Joseph is saying, and we could, we're coming from a different angle, but I see it as very compatible, very compatible. But here again, I think, for pensions, it makes sense to go in that direction.
Okay, thanks a lot, Thierry. Thank you to Joseph for your very knowledgeable contributions. There's a question in the chat about how much pensions are invested in sustainable assets today. I sort of take the risk of answering that it's difficult to say, because there's no classification about what a pension is as a financial product and what belongs to the pension market and doesn't, because of precisely this vision of third pillar being actually a financial product, like a savings product and not a pension. So I think we will leave the question unanswered for now, and I'll give the floor back to Maciek for some closing words.
Thank you very much, Philippe. Well, super briefly, more I think about what we heard from the first session and the second session, it gives me even more. I'm even more convinced about the reason behind bringing this global approach to pensions to the debate within the EU Retirement Week. Indeed, we as Age Platform, we thought that we cannot discuss on personal savings in a complete, let's say, disconnection to the broader question of how different pillars actually, and we saw that neither of them is fully sustainable, neither of them can bring the solution to the question of adequacy of old age income, and that's why we have to look at them and discuss the upcoming reforms as part. It's a package. It's maybe it's a pity that Ana Carla Pereira from the European Commission, she couldn't follow all this debate, because I think there are so many already, I would say, concrete solutions, but also red lights, things that should be taken into this debate that will just, or that has started with this high level group on the future of social protection, but because there was an opening from her side saying that there will be an opportunity for different stakeholders to contribute to it. So I would say that we will wrap up conclusions, your thoughts and insights from this debate. And again, thank you very much to you, Joseph and Thierry, in the second panel. It was as important and interesting as the first one. So we will try to continue on this in the upcoming months. And my last point is that we will, as well with our partners, co-organizers of this first European Retirement Week, make sure that, so it's not a goodbye for this initiative. We would really like to insert it, that's to say so, into the EU calendar of events. So hopefully there will be a next EU Retirement Week. And again, we will make sure that it will address actually all the diversity of issues in relation to adequacy in old age and pensions architecture. So again, it's a big thank you to all of us around the table. I see that there is half of the initial number of participants, but I understand we went beyond the time schedule. So even more warmly, thank you for taking your extra time, and let's stay reconnected. Thank you very much. Goodbye.
Pleasure.
Talk soon. See you soon. Bye-bye.
Bye now.
Thank you from my side to everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.